Hello, everybody. I'm Joy Behar, and let me introduce you to people on the stage. All the way at the end there is Jacob Hoffman, who is Charlotte's grandson, the woman in the movie. And next to him is Walter Kleinman. His parents were from Germany. I presume you're from Germany, and your father was a doctor.
I can't hear
and you
what
have an
she's
interesting story that you'll tell us about how you made it through. And then Harry Arlen, sitting next to him from Yugoslavia. His family came to Italy in 1941 with his parents. Next to him is Joseph Perella, who's the executive producer of the documentary and founder of Perella Weinberg Partners, okay? And then next to him is Elizabeth Bettina, who is a consulting producer on the film and the author of this terrific book, It Happened in Italy, on which the film is based, right, Elizabeth? Yes. And I recommend that you pick up this book. It's extremely interesting. Just a quick word about how I happen to be involved in this. My only claim to fame is that I'm Italian-American, and I'm very much involved with the 92nd Street Y. And my family is from Calabria, and I had no idea that these people had done any good work like that in Calabria. Probably my ancestors were there. Hopefully they helped some people. And it's a big secret. It's like a big secret. And this film opened my eyes to the fact that the Italian people had helped the Jews. It was very touching, personal for me. So let me start with Elizabeth, because Elizabeth wrote this book. How did you happen to get involved? Elizabeth is Italian-American also. Tell us a little bit about how you got involved with this.
I'm second generation. My parents were born in Brooklyn in the Bronx and typically don't speak much Italian. And my grandma took me to her village, which is the cover of the book. It's called Campagna, and it's nestled in the valleys outside of Naples, about an hour. And I went there every summer from when I was 10 to 18 for 3 months. And I always knew c'era qualche ebreo salvato qui. There were a few Jews saved here. And the way it was told to me was as if it was a few Anne Frank families. And I kept trying to figure out how they found this place from Germany all the way down the boot of Italy. You can't find Campagna today with a GPS in 2015. Really? It's that hidden. And qualche ebreo, qualche ebreo. Now, we all know Italians are the best yentas in the world. They can sit on that stoop. They're better than Google, Facebook, Instagram. They never discussed this with me at any length. 10 years ago, I was back in Italy with my grandma, and we were had dinner. Someone showed us a picture of an Orthodox rabbi, and it's one of the first pictures in the book. Steven Spielberg would hire him for central casting. And I'm sitting there going, what is this picture? It's page 7 of the book. And there's an Orthodox rabbi. So what are you doing in Campagna? 1940, standing next to a bishop, a police officer, and I was like, huh? And it was the end of August. I came back to New York. I was having dinner with one of my best friends from 4th grade, Ellen Barr. She is from LA. And where's an Italian girl and a Jewish girl having dinner? What cuisine? There's only one.
Chinese, of course.
There you go. Okay. And she looks at me and she says, what's a rabbi doing in your town? I said, I have no idea. She says, we always knew you were an honorary Jew. Now we have a reason why. There's only one person on the planet that can understand Campagna and being Jewish, and it's you. And I started doing research.
So you started to do research, and then the rest is history.
And the rest is history, and here's everybody else.
And then Joe Perella decided to make this film.
Well, yeah, and everything happened by accident. I would say my first exposure to the subject of Italy and the Holocaust occurred thanks to Steven Spielberg, because when he made that movie, I saw it, and I saw it over and over.
Schindler's List?
Pardon?
Schindler's List.
Schindler's List, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And I went out and bought the film, kept watching it at home. And then in December of '93, I read an op-ed piece by someone who still writes for the Wall Street Journal, Dorothy Rabinowitz, and the title of it was called An Army of Schindlers. And in there, she said, well, it's really great. Oskar Schindler, making material for the Nazi war machine, saved the 1,200 people working in his factory. But in Italy, with nothing to be gained, thousands upon thousands of citizens protected their fellow man by doing good things. And you know, I read it, and like you, I felt a great sense of pride, but I really couldn't do very much about it. until I met Elizabeth, and that was purely by accident in the Columbus Day festivities. And then I met her a second time, because at the first time we talked about the whole subject of Italy and the Holocaust. Second time I saw her at another Italian function, she said, well, I wrote a book about it now. And I read like 2 or 3 chapters. I called her up and I said, we got to talk. I said, nobody reads books today. The moving image has a much more profound impact. More people will see it. More people will be aware of the subject. She says, well, I know at Italy and the Holocaust Foundation, Vincent Mormarelli knows more about the subject than anyone. She introduced us. They had no money in the bank to make a documentary movie, to go to Israel, to Italy, to do all that costs a lot of money. So I said, well, I know a lot of wealthy Italians.
You do?
Their names were featured at the end of the film.
How did you get Isabella Rossellini to do it?
Well, that was all. Unfortunately, Orrin Jacoby couldn't be here tonight, the director of the film. He's in Charleston, where the film is being shown in the film festival today. But the way I got Orrin was, by this time, I was so obsessed with the subject, I pigeonhole every Italian I meet, and I say, what do you know about Italy and the Holocaust? Nothing. And so I'm ranting in my barber shop, which is a very small barber shop on Broadway, and I'm done yelling at the barber from Calabria because he doesn't know anything about it, and his brother Joe doesn't know anything about it. And I'm done with my beard trim, and somebody taps me on the shoulder, and he said, I overheard you. My name's Orrin Jacoby. I make documentary movies. I'd like to send you 2 of them. Anyhow,
that's how
he got to make the movie for us, and the rest is history. Here it is.
Harry Arlen, you were in Ferramonte in the what you it's
camp.
Not a camp. I would call it. It's not a concentration camp.
They call it the literal Italian phrase.
But they seem so able to freely move about and do their lives. So I wouldn't call it a concentration camp. What would you call it?
Well, it was a concentration camp. We were refugees in Yugoslavia, originally from Czechoslovakia. And we happened to be lucky that we were in the Italian occupied portion of Yugoslavia. So they arrested us and put us on a train. And I mind you, it was not a cattle freight train like the Nazis used. It was a regular coach, a regular train. They put us on the train, and we arrived a day later in Ferramonte. We expected the worst. You know, we heard about concentration camps already then. And in 1941, we arrived, and we thought we had to go through a check-in, but they didn't take our possessions. They didn't take our clothes. They didn't take our money. They didn't take anything. They just were looking for weapons or contraband. So we settled, and they didn't split the families. So we settled in a camp, and we tried to do the best we could. I mean, conditions were not very, very good, but nobody was tortured. Nobody was killed. They pretty much let the people in the camp run their own show. I just have to tell you a little thing that we did have a clinic. We didn't have a school. We had a synagogue. We had a church. The clinic was an interesting place. They had an Italian doctor who was in charge of the clinic. But there were so many Jewish doctors who were detainees that the Italian doctor simply stepped aside and let the Jewish doctor do whatever was necessary. Well, it so happens that my father had a medical condition that the clinic was not equipped for. So what did the Italians do? They called for an ambulance, took my father 30 miles to Cosenza, to the provincial capital, put him in a hospital, and they allowed me to go to visit him. I mean, that's the concentration camp that nobody has heard of. it was a place by Nazi standard, you could call it a resort. But it wasn't that good. We used to go swimming. It was very hot there. We used to go swimming. We were crawled under the barbed wire to go to the river outside of the camp. And then we had to go back under the barbed wire to get back into the camp. The Italians were guarding us, but we didn't have machine gun towers or anything of that sort. It was, what can I tell you, a life. Well, we were lucky because we were in the south of Italy. We were liberated in 1943 by the British 8th Army. So I enlisted in the British Army, and that's another story. I won't talk about that.
What do you think, Harold, it is about the Italians?
I'm sorry?
What do you think it was about the Italians that was different from other groups? The Polish were not as nice, for example, and they were Catholic. They were not as good to the Jews.
No.
The Hungarians were not. The French weren't either. So what about the Italians? Why?
I don't know. And I didn't hear the question. I'm sorry. I'm hard of hearing.
You said, what was it about the Italians that made them different?
Brothers.
The Italians were humane. I can't describe to you how humane they were because the Germans were not.
That we know.
Definitely not.
But 80% of the Jews in Italy survived, whereas 80% of the Jews in Europe died, and 80% of the Jews in Italy survived.
In Ferramonte, we all survived.
Yeah.
The only violent death that we had in Ferramonte was from a Royal Air Force fighter plane that strafed the camp. And 4 people died, and I think about 8 or so were wounded. And they set 2 barracks on fire. But everybody in the camp survived. There were a few people who died in the camp of natural causes. And they are buried in the Catholic cemetery in the village of Tarsia, which is the closest town. And I think that's the only Catholic cemetery that has Jewish graves. I think there are about 4 graves there left at this point.
And also, Harold, didn't you become friends with the sons of the director of the camp? Did you become friends with that?
Oh yeah, the director of the camp had 2 sons, and they became friends. And since they were not detainees, they would take me out on trips out of the camp. We roamed all over the countryside, and they were just wonderful people. The camp director, or the commandant, if you want to call it, had a horse, and they didn't show it in the film, but one of the people in the picture, Charlotte Hoffman, was a little girl, and the commandant put her on a horse, and he rode the horse around the camp. He also had a car, and he would sometimes take little kids, put them in a car, drive them into the nearby town in Tarsia, and buy them ice cream. I mean, if that isn't humane, I don't know what else could be.
Okay. Walter Kleinman, tell us about your situation.
Well, my parents came to the city of Potenza, which is the regional capital of Basilicata, known as Lucania at that time, in the year 1940. They had been arrested by the fascist police. My father first was sent to the city of Campania, to the convent of San Bartolomeo, and after 6 months, he asked his commanding officer, because he had served in the Italian army before the war, to be transferred and meet my mother, to be with my mother, and I was born in the city of Potenza. And if it hadn't been for Elizabeth Bettina, I never would have learned that I had two families. Elizabeth Bettina arranged a trip to the Vatican in 2008 for those people who had survived in Italy during the Holocaust and any of their children or representatives. And on the way back from Ferramonte di Tarsia on a bus, the mayor's aide receives a call saying, "We know Walter Kleinman, we'd like to see him." And so I said, invite him back to the hotel. We were staying for the last night in the town of Campania. And as I came back to the hotel, there were three people waiting for me at the threshold of the hotel. A short gentleman, his name was Rocco Giacomino, his wife Cinzia, and his daughter, his 30-year-old daughter, Juliana. And he says, "Do you know who I am?" I said, "No." And he says, "I'm your brother." Well, he was my milk brother. In Italian, il fratello di latte. His mother nursed me when my mother couldn't. I was, of course, shocked. And out of his pocket, he takes out a letter which my mother had written to his mother in 1948, telling how much he missed, she missed Italy and the Italian language. On the side of the letter, a little message I had written in Italian, wishing them Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. What happened then is that Christmas I decided to take my wife to Italy and bond with the Giacominos, and they showed me around town where I had gone to school, both public school and Catholic school, and I met their whole family. And on the way back, and I had gone back to Italy about 5 or 6 times since 2008, but 2 weeks after I got back, I received an anonymous email, which I opened reluctantly, and the message read as follows: "My name is Antonio Quinbury, and my mother nursed you too in Potenza in 1942. And that was a shock, because with that came 2 attachments. A letter which my mother had sent to Mrs. Quinbury some 65 years earlier, as thanking her for all of her sacrifices, and also a picture of my first girlfriend, Ruth Goldman, who's sitting in the audience today.
She's here tonight?
She's here tonight. And so that summer, I bonded with not only my milk brother, but also my milk sister, Marina, who had been born 2 months earlier. And yes, Mrs. Quinbury was still alive. She died this last year. So I've been going back, and without this, of course, I don't think I would have been alive. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Certainly without penicillin and without food, the right food, I think I might have succumbed to the elements.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Okay. Jacob Hoffman. Jacob is a living example of how one life can be saved, right?
Yep, definitely. I mean, my great-grandparents fled Germany just 10 days before my grandmother was born. And the family that I had that stayed in Germany didn't live to, well, obviously past the war. But my great-grandparents and my grandmother all lived, I mean, to have my parents, who then had me. What's really amazing is that I still keep in touch with the family in Italy that hid my grandparent, or my great-grandparents and my grandmother. So it's, to me, amazing that through all these years, we've been able to maintain contact. And I mean, now me, the great-grandchild of my great-grandparents and the great-grandchildren of the family in Italy, I mean, I just saw them most recently in April, and I spent a couple of days with them. But that really started at my bar mitzvah, because they had planned a trip to America during the time of my bar mitzvah to come and be there, which was just an amazing opportunity, I think, because it was, I guess, that whole idea of the circle of life coming back to itself. And their ancestors helped save my family, and now there's this major Jewish milestone in my life happening, and they're all there. So that was really amazing for me.
So Macheda is still there?
She's still in Italy, yeah.
When she talks about the experience, what does she think? What does she say about it? Because these people don't seem to ever want to brag about it or talk about it. Or, you know, I mean, this is a big secret. People don't know this. A lot of people, I think, know about how the Danes were very good, you know, but the Italians, we never heard this before.
There are a lot of people that when you ask them, why'd you do this? They get annoyed.
Why?
Because it's the right thing to have done. In other words, why would you ever think that I would do anything other than the right thing? Right? So they get very annoyed that you ask them.
Well, Mario Bartali also implies, you know, there are others who risked even more than I did, so it would be almost bragging to say that I did anything. So there is that. And if you talk to, mostly when you see films or read books about the people who saved Jews during that period, they never think of themselves as heroes. The woman who hid the Anne Frank family and all these people, they never say that they're heroes, ever. It's quite touching, and it's stunning, really, you know? So you see the family, isn't that nice?
Yeah, I mean, I actually just had a text message conversation with one of the great-granddaughters last week, and she was showing me the remodel she's doing to her apartment. So, I mean, even though we're thousands of miles apart, we can still keep in touch, and they came back again. Well, I guess I saw them again when I went back to do the filming for the documentary, and that was really cool, because I got to meet some other people that I hadn't met at my bar mitzvah. And then after that, the Simon Wiesenthal Center in Los Angeles held a gala where they honored the entire village of Secchiano and presented them with a Medal of Valor for the work that they did in hiding my family during the Holocaust. So that was the third time. And then, like I said, just this past April, I was studying abroad in Madrid. And during my spring break, I went over to Italy and spent a couple of days with all of the families, both in Milan and then in another city called Ancona, which is on the eastern coast of Italy. And we went places, and I actually spoke at the daughter of Mercedes is a school teacher, a high school teacher. And so I went into their class, and I helped describe my grandmother's story and just supported it with all the photos from my bar mitzvah and that Patrizia, her daughter, had.
Elizabeth, before cool. Maybe people have questions to ask the panel. If you do, I think they have cards, maybe, or no? Do you have anything to add to any of this before we introduce the people in the audience?
Mercedes' daughter is a school teacher, and she thought what had happened with Secchiano, which is 962 meters, okay? It's a couple of city blocks. All those people knew what was going on. That's another thing. Well, the entire village knew who was who. That's just the way it was. But more importantly, she didn't know anything about what happened in the other parts of Italy till she read my book, which is crazy. She's a teacher in Milan. I was asked by the former ambassador from Italy to the United States when he became the Minister of Foreign Affairs to speak in Rome with the Minister of Education. The Minister of Education was from Calabria, and she said, with her associate, her deputy, I said, do you know Ferramonti? Ferramonti is in the region. She never heard of it, blank, white, nothing. She never had a clue what it was. She says, what's Ferramonti? If the Minister of Education in a country doesn't know Ferramonti, the largest camp that held 2,000 to 4,000 people, where do you go from there? It's a surprise to us that we don't know. Imagine me, so many years later, I find an Orthodox rabbi in my town that has 6 or 7 churches and the ladies with the rosary beads and everything, okay? So one thing I will say to everybody here is, I sign my books, if you're not indifferent, things can be different, and I'm adding something to that. Be the difference. You have a responsibility to tell a story of goodness like this and talk about it at Thanksgiving, at Hanukkah, at Christmas, and bring it forth, and maybe it'll influence somebody just to do the right thing here, like get up on the subway and give someone a seat. You don't have to stand in front of a Nazi truck. It's not that hard.
Do you want to read this at all? I don't know if there's anything you want to do with that. I'd like to, can you turn the lights up, please, so we can see the people in the audience. We have some people here who also are survivors who survived the war in Italy. Thank you. Ruth Tobias, want to stand up, Ruth? If you can.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Elfie Hendel. She was a survivor with Walter Kleinman in Potenza. That's the beauty of it. Needs a microphone.
Yeah.
Get a mic. Can you ask them if they can get a microphone?
Do we have a mic that we can bring down there?
Thank you, Ruth. It's in nice contrast to the efficiency of the Germans. Elfie Hendel was a survivor in various places in Italy with her family, including a convent in Rome. Elfie is here? There she is. Microphone. Can we get a microphone, please?
We're working on it.
Hurry up. Doesn't work.
Not on.
Just turn it on. They didn't expect that. They didn't expect we have anybody speak in the audience. No one can hear you.
There it is.
Is it working? God. I hear something from somewhere. Thank you, Joe.
Oh, there you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it on?
Yay!
Okay.
I was going to give her my mic.
Okay. Well, I am here, and I'm here with family, with children, grandchildren, their father. And it was Italy who enabled us to live through the war. Because I was born in Vienna, and we had to leave Vienna in 30. We left too late in 39 and got to Italy. And the movie showed many towns that also had Jews, and we were in a little town in Agordo all the way north, which my parents chose to go to and chose not to stay in Ferramonti, which in a way was a mistake because we got liberated much later. But Agordo also, a family took us in. We changed our names, and I think there was something in the movie, and indeed I retained the E of my first name, Elena, instead of Elfie or Friede. And Galliani, because my father worked for some company in secret in Agordo, and his name was Galliani. So, all in all, that was the name change. And I returned in 1970, and the people who hid us we were living in a lovely house Their children were there, and we embraced and hugged. And they remembered, and I remembered how much they tried to help us while we were in Agado. Was the experience only positive in Italy? Of course it couldn't be. We were hiding, mostly in the convent, in addition to the camp. I was in charge of my sister, who was younger. My mother went to be with my dad, who was hiding out in Rome in a private apartment. And my memories, well, now I have more memories, but you know, my memories were, take care of your sister and make sure you don't get caught in the bombardments. But there is such a history. I mean, I met my children's father in Rome, his sister Tamar, who was there as well, my former sister-in-law. So, you know, we do have a lot of family that did survive. It's just that the memories of the places and Rome and Ferramonti just kept coming back at me as I saw this movie for the second time. And I don't know what else to say.
Thank you.
I don't remember you, Harry. But we were there at almost at the same time, right?
I can't hear you. You can't hear.
It's all right. Come on. Thank you, Elfie.
said
Then there's
she doesn't
this name
remember you,
is
but
funny.
you were
Lilo
I don't remember
O'Grady.
her either.
Lilo.
But I
O'Grady.
know her friend.
Yeah, that's her married name.
Oh, is Lilo here?
Yes. Don't worry, you don't have to say
You don't have
anything.
to speak.
You don't have to speak.
We
Don't worry.
just want to people to
acknowledge
know-
you.
Acknowledge you, right? And then Lilo. Ruth Rubenstein is here, and Harry Arlen's family is here. 8 people from Harry's family. Walter Kleinman's family is here. A lot of people from there. There they are. Elfie Hendel's family is here. Shani Rainbolt is a daughter of a survivor. She's here. David Hendel, who was a survivor. He's a retired dentist and happens to be Barbara Walters' dentist. Oh my God. Small world. Agnes Hendel is a survivor of Bergen-Belsen. And Tamar Hendel is a survivor, David's sister. Okay. And also Eric Lamette. So unless anybody wants to say anything, I guess. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, a couple things. It's really great if you go to the Yad Vashem website, you can actually read the stories of people and what they did to save Jewish people. And there's over 500 Italians in Yad Vashem. But as an example of the humility and the, I call it lack of arrogance, it's embodied in Gino Bartali, right?
I think so.
Because I think it's Maimonides that says the ultimate gift of charity is that you give and you don't know you're helping, who you're helping, and the people who are receiving the benefit don't know who gave it, right? So Gino Bartali did what he did, and his motto was "Si fa ma non si dice," meaning do it and don't talk about it.
Yeah.
It wasn't until last year, Elizabeth, right, that he was entered into the garden among righteous among nations.
Correct.
What took 70 years for a guy like that? I think it was
Because he didn't want to talk about it.
No, right, but I think Elizabeth was very instrumental because when she gave her book to the Israeli ambassador to the UN, was it him?
Yes.
He says, oh, the guy in your book, he's living in Israel, he's still alive. Giorgio, who was walking around in the film, he's 90 years old. So I think that helped probably give Gino the recognition, given that, you know,
So many
he did what he did.
so many stories that we don't even know about. That story in the hospital was great.
Oh, yeah.
That incredible doctor.
There's no K in the Italian alphabet.
No.
So when you, in Italian, there's no K.
Yeah.
But the head of the SS, his first name started with a K, and
Yeah.
the head of the German army in Italy. His name also starts with a K. You saw his picture there. There's a good movie, by the way, that Gregory Peck was in. That it's called The Scarlet and the Black, and it's about a Monsignor Kelly who concocted this underground to protect American and British down.
Well, sometimes the
sailors.
church gets a bad reputation during the war because Pope
Yeah.
Pius XII.
Well,
It's very
This
controversial.
movie's not about the Pope.
No.
Okay.
But the priests and the nuns seem to have been wonderful.
There's hardly anyone that was out in the society. Okay, I'm talking about outside of Faramonte and places like that, because one of the things I think it was mentioned in the movie, if you were Austrian or German, you could enter Italy without a visa. You couldn't enter the United States. Pause.
Yeah.
Right? They didn't let anyone in.
No.
In great numbers.
That was the problem.
But they could go to Italy without a visa. So, you know, anyway.
The other thing that's so incredible to me is, you know, thank God when I'm not in this situation, because I really don't know if I would risk my own family for someone else's family. That, you know, you have your children and your grandchildren, and you think, well, they could kill my child. So that the bravery is incredible, really, when you think about it. The risk taking.
One thing about coincidences also, Walter and Harry both live in Huntington, Long Island. And they didn't know each other until somehow the book put them together. And Harry never spoke until he saw me speak at an event in Comac, and now he's speaking about it. And that's another reason why people don't know, because survivors themselves didn't speak about it, because many of them say, I wasn't in Auschwitz. I was at a camp compared to, a resort compared to a camp run by Germans. So they didn't talk about it either. So that's a whole other situation, and Shani can discuss that. Later we can talk about those things. But that's part of the reason. And I think Eric has something he wants to say. She's going to give you the mic.
My name is Enrico Lamet. Although I'm a survivor, I'm not going to talk about it today, but I do want to talk about some instances that I know why Italians were so great, so magnificent in saving Jews. In the small village where I was interned, I was what they used to call open internment. The mayor or the assistant mayor in 1943, after September 8, when Italy surrendered to the Allies, the Germans came into town, and one of the officers went to the city hall and said, I want a list of all the Jews. And the mayor said, I'll get it ready for you. This was 1943. How many years ago was that? Still waiting for that list. Still waiting for that list. What's even more important, there is an issue that very few people know. In 1940, when Italy finally entered the war against France, because they saw that France was surrendering, the Italian occupational forces were in the southern part of France. And one day, you familiar with that? One day, the Germans came in, not in quantity, but just sufficient to accumulate 2,500 Jewish people, put them on a train, ready to leave for concentration camp. The general of the Italian army got wind of what was happening, knew what they were up to. He ordered all of his officers to get aboard the train and get every human being out of that train as fast as they could. And 2,500 people that day were saved from going to a concentration camp.
That's what you reminded me of. You know, the thing that was counterintuitive and that surprises people when they first hear your statistic, 80% survived this. How the hell could that be? I mean, Mussolini and Hitler were supposed to be allies.
Yeah.
Well, all during the time, and this is, by the way, not a defense of Mussolini, he was a fascist dictator, but it says a lot about the people, including the military. all during the time Mussolini was in charge of Italy, up until September, when Hitler had what I call his oh shit moment, because the Allies had liberated Sicily, they had captured Mussolini, the anti-fascists, thrown him in jail. The Germans weren't occupying Italy, nor were they occupying the southeast part of France, which was under the control of the Italian army. All during the time that Mussolini was in charge, not one Jew was deported, not one. They did pass those racial laws, which was horrible, and you saw that in the film. But it wasn't until the country got occupied by the Germans.
Then they didn't have as much choice.
And the first deportation from Rome was October 16th, 1943. The Germans invaded in early September, and they did exactly what you said. Yeah, they were worried about the Allies, but they were just as obsessed with the killing machine and going into all these villages and trying to round up, and offered a 5,000 lira reward, as you saw, for one person. They had to actually try to bribe people to do the wrong thing.
Yeah.
I want to say one thing, is that it's an honor to be with all of these people. And the people in the audience, and the people in the film, and so many others, and the people in the book, because they entrusted us with their stories that many of their own children didn't know. And we feel an obligation to tell their stories the right way. And sometimes it's hard to see some of the film because some people are not with us anymore. And there's a special bond that we've all had through some of the trips and spending time together and telling the deepest of stories. And we thank you for sharing your stories with us, and that we could share them correctly with everybody else. And there's a special bond and a love that we have, and that's what you
And it's important, I think, for people who were in Italy to share the story, to show the world that you can be kind, you can be good, that not everybody is evil who was in that period. There were people who did the right thing as role models for other people. We need it in this country today for people to stand up and speak against the stupidity that's going on in this country. It's happening again.
The whole world.
Anyway, thank you all so much for coming.
Appreciate
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Joy.